The basement apartment on Elm Street. They tell you that when you turn 24, you're supposed to feel invincible. You have the degree, you have the first real job with a salary that doesn't just cover rent, but actually leaves you with enough to buy overpriced coffee. You feel like an adult. You think the world is just waiting for you to walk through it. But they don't tell you about the silence. They don't tell you what happens when the high of independence wears off, and you're left alone in a place where nobody knows your name, where the nearest house is a dark silhouette behind a wall of pine trees, and every shadow looks like a man standing still. I'm recording this from a motel room right off Interstate 95. The wallpaper is peeling. The neon sign outside is buzzing so loud, it's giving me a migraine, and the deadbolt on the door is flimsy. But I can't go back to Elm Street. I can never go back there. If you are listening to this in your bed right now, if you are lying in the dark with your headphones on, trying to fall asleep, do me a favor, just check your locks. Right now, I'll wait. You check them? Good, because I used to be just like you. I thought locks kept people out. I didn't know that sometimes. They keep people in. Let's start from the very beginning. My name isn't important. Let's just say I was like every other recent college graduate in the city. I had just landed a job as a junior financial analyst at a prestigious firm downtown. The office was inside one of those massive corporate glass monoliths, 30 stories of steel, mirrors, and sterile white light. During the day, I was surrounded by thousands of people, but it was a lonely kind of crowd. Everyone wore noise-canceling headphones. Everyone stared at their screens. By the time I finished my overtime shifts at 7:30 p.m., the building was a ghost town. I couldn't afford to live anywhere near downtown. The rent prices were predatory. After weeks of desperate searching, I found a listing for 412 Elm Street. It was a large, sprawling, split-level house built in the late 1940s, located in a heavily wooded suburb about 45 minutes outside the city. The upper levels of the house were completely empty. The leasing agency explained that the owner was an elderly widow named Mrs. Gable, who was currently living in a specialized memory care facility 2 states away. The house was caught in legal limbo between her heirs, so the agency wanted to rent out the finished basement apartment just to ensure the property wasn't vandalized. Because of this, the rent was unbelievably cheap. I fell in love with it during the daytime viewing. It had a private entrance at the back of the property. To get to it, you had to walk down a set of steep, moss-covered stone steps that led beneath the kitchen deck. The backyard was massive, nearly 2 acres of unmaintained lawn that ended abruptly at a dense dark wall of old pine trees. The nearest neighbor's house was completely obscured by the forest. It felt like my own private sanctuary, my own fortress of independence. Inside the apartment was rustic but cozy. It had low ceilings with dark wooden support beams, a small living space with a brick fireplace that had been sealed off, a basic kitchen, and a bedroom at the very back. But there was one specific architectural feature that I didn't question enough. In the narrow hallway between my bedroom and the bathroom, there was a small, heavy wooden door. It was only about 4 feet high. It didn't have a standard doorknob. Instead, it was secured by a heavy, blackened iron latch and a brand new modern brass padlock. During the initial walkthrough, I pointed at it. The real estate agent, a young guy who clearly wanted to finish the tour and go home, barely looked at it. Oh, that's just the crawl space. he said, waving his clipboard dismissively. It's a subfloor void that runs under the entire foundation of the main house upstairs. It's completely unfinished, just dirt floors, structural pillars, and old plumbing lines. The agency keeps it locked permanently so tenants don't try to use it for storage. Old basements can get damp, you know. You don't want your clothes getting moldy. Just ignore it. And I did. I signed the lease that very afternoon. I thought I had struck gold. I didn't realize that I had just rented a room inside a predator's hunting ground. The first month was fine. I busied myself with unpacking, buying cheap furniture, and establishing a routine. I would wake up at 6 a.m., make coffee, walk up the stone steps in the morning mist, drive to the train station, and spend 10 hours at my desk. I would return home long after dark. Baggy clothes, tired eyes, the typical routine. But by the second month, the winter began to set in. In New England, winter darkness is heavy. By 4:30 p.m., the sun is gone. The woods behind the house turned into a wall of absolute blackness. If I turned off the single floodlight above my door, the darkness felt heavy, almost physical. The silence inside the basement began to feel oppressive. You start to hear every little sound. The house upstairs settling, the pipes groaning, the wind rattling the small high window wells near the ceiling. To cope with the isolation, I did what every lonely 24-year-old does. I downloaded Tinder. I swiped through dozens of profiles. The usual mix of gym selfies, trap boys looking for hookups, and guys whose personalities were entirely based on their cars. And then I matched with Julian. Julian felt different. His profile was clean, intelligent, and comforting. He was 28, wore elegant wire-rimmed glasses, and had a soft, genuine smile. His bio stated that he was an architectural historian working for a preservation society, specializing in restoring colonial-era homes in the valley. It explained why he was so articulate in his texts. He didn't use slang. He didn't rush into anything sexual. He asked about my career, my interests, and my life. Looking back now, that was the first warning sign. The information asymmetry. When you're lonely, you mistake intense interrogation for genuine interest. Julian wanted to know everything about my daily routine. He would text me at 8 a.m. Hope you caught your usual train. Is it crowded today? He would text me at 9 p.m. Are you safe at home in your cozy basement now? I thought it was incredibly sweet. I thought I had found a protective, old-school gentleman. One evening, I mentioned that the wind was howling so loudly, it was keeping me awake. He responded almost instantly. Old houses can be so loud, especially the lower levels. Does your basement have good insulation? Are the windows reinforced, or are they those old single-pane glass wells? You must feel so far away from the rest of the world out there in the woods. I replied without thinking, yeah, it's pretty isolated. No roommates, no dog, just me and a creepy locked crawl space next to my bedroom. If a serial killer comes for me, I guess the trees will be my only witnesses. Ha ha. He didn't text back a ha ha. He waited 5 minutes, then wrote, a locked crawl space. Fascinating. Security is paramount when a young woman lives entirely alone. We should get a drink this Friday. You deserve a night out of the dark. We agreed to meet at a high-end cocktail lounge connected to the Grand Plaza Mall downtown. It was a massive, bustling commercial center, the exact kind of public space you choose to stay safe when meeting a stranger from the internet. When I arrived, the lounge was dimly lit. filled with the chatter of corporate workers unwinding after the work week. Julian was already there, sitting in a velvet boot in the furthest corner. He looked exactly like his photos. But the moment I sat down opposite him, a strange cold sensation settled in the pit of my stomach. It was his posture. He was sitting completely rigid, his hands folded neatly on the table, and his eyes were incredibly wide. He didn't blink at a normal frequency. When I spoke, he didn't just listen, he stared at my mouth, then my neck, then my hands, as if he were memorizing my physical dimensions. Then came the boundary testing. During our conversation, I ordered a glass of white wine. When the waitress brought it, Julian didn't look at her. He simply reached out his hand, picked up my glass and moved it to the other side of the table, closer to him. "You shouldn't drink too fast," he said with a soft, patronizing smile. "I want to make sure you keep a clear head tonight." It was a small gesture, but it felt incredibly controlling. It was masked as care, but it was a test to see if I would protest. I didn't. I just laughed nervously and let him do it. An hour later, he reached across the table and placed his hand over my wrist. His skin was shockingly cold. His grip wasn't aggressive, but it was firm, unyielding. "You have very delicate wrists," he murmured, his unblinking eyes locking onto mine. "You look like someone who is easy to break, but hard to catch." A shiver ran down my spine. The romantic illusion was completely shattered. I pulled my hand back, making a clumsy excuse about checking the time on my phone. I told him I had a massive headache and needed to go home immediately. I told Julian I would call an Uber from the lobby, but he stood up immediately, sliding out of the boot. "Absolutely not," he said. His voice had lost its soft, intellectual warmth. It was flat, heavy, and authoritative. "The city is dangerous at night. Trap boys, predators, criminals everywhere. You told me you parked in the mall garage, didn't you?" I had mentioned it casually at the start of the date. I nodded reluctantly. "Then I will walk you to your vehicle," he said, grabbing his coat. A real gentleman never lets a woman walk through a concrete tomb alone. I didn't want to make a scene in the elegant lounge, so I let him follow me to the elevators. We pressed the button for level B3, the lowest, oldest section of the underground garage. When the doors opened at B3, the contrast was terrifying. The bustling bright mall upstairs was gone. Down here, the air was freezing and stagnant, smelling of old motor oil and damp concrete. Half of the fluorescent light tubes were flickering or completely dead. My car was parked in the furthest row, right against the foundation wall of the mall. Our footsteps echoed loudly in the empty space. But as we walked deeper into the shadows of the concrete pillars, I realized something. There was a rhythm to the footsteps. Julian and I were walking in sync, but there was a fraction of a second delay, a fault echo. Every time we stepped, there was a faint scraping sound that followed us from the darkness between the parked SUVs. I stopped walking abruptly and turned around. The row behind us was empty, just rows of silent vehicles and concrete columns painted with yellow numbers. "Is something wrong?" Julian asked, stopping beside me. He didn't look back. He kept his eyes fixed entirely on my face. I thought I heard someone else walking," I whispered, my heart rate beginning to climb. Julian let out a low, dry chuckle. "It's just the acoustics of a subterranean structure. The sound bounces off the foundation. Come on, let's get you to your car." We reached my sedan. I quickly pressed the unlock button on my key fob. The headlights flashed, casting long distorted shadow against the wall. I opened the driver's side door, but before I could step inside, Julian stepped into the space between the door and the car frame. He effectively trapped me against the seat. He leaned down, his face just inches from mine. He didn't try to kiss me. Instead, he took a deep, slow breath through his nose, inhaling the air from inside my vehicle. No air freshener, he murmured, his voice sounding entirely detached. No gym bags, no signs of anyone else ever riding in this passenger seat. You really do live completely, beautifully alone, don't you? I felt a surge of pure panic. I pushed past him into the driver's seat, pulled the door shut with all my strength, and instantly hit the central locking button. The heavy thud of the locks felt like a shield. Julian didn't look angry. He just stood there under the flickering yellow light, pulled a small black leather notebook from his breast pocket, and wrote something down with a silver pen. I started the engine, threw the car into reverse, and tore out of the parking space. As I drove up the concrete ramp toward the exit, I looked in my rearview mirror. He was still standing by the pillar. He wasn't walking toward the elevators. He was just watching my taillights disappear into the dark. I drove home in a state of hypervigilance. I checked my rearview mirror every 30 seconds, terrified that a pair of headlights would follow me all the way to Elm Street, but the highway was empty. By the time I turned down the long, unlit gravel driveway of the house, the rain was pouring in sheets. I ran down the slippery stone steps, unlocked my heavy oak door, slammed it shut, and engaged the deadbolt. For the first time in my life, I felt the need for extra security. I grabbed a heavy wooden dining chair and wedged the top rail firmly underneath the door handle. If anyone tried to pick the lock, the door wouldn't budge. I went into the bathroom to wash my face. I needed to wash the memory of that date away. The bathroom in my apartment had no windows. It was a small interior room surrounded by the foundation walls. The only ventilation was an old noisy extractor fan in the ceiling that rattled like a broken engine whenever it was turned on. I turned the faucet on, splashed cold water on my face, and grabbed a towel. Suddenly, the extractor fan sputtered, groaned, and died. The sudden absence of the loud rattle left the bathroom in a suffocating, dead silence. And then, through the metal vent mesh in the wall, I heard it, a muffled wet scraping sound, followed by a low rhythmic sigh. It sounded like something heavy and soft being dragged slowly across a loose dirt floor. It was coming from the exact other side of the bathroom wall. Inside the locked crawl space, I stopped breathing. I stood frozen, the towel pressed to my face, my eyes wide in the mirror. The scraping sound moved slowly along the perimeter of the wall, stopping exactly where the drywall met the corner of the shower stall. Then it stopped, and then came a sound that made my blood turn to liquid nitrogen. A low, long, satisfied human sigh. It was a man's voice, muffled by the wood and the insulation, but undeniably human. I threw the towel down, sprinted out of the bathroom, and locked myself inside my bedroom. I crawled onto the center of my bed, pulling the duvet over my shoulders, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I opened Tinder. My hands were shaking so violently, I almost dropped the phone. I went to my messages, found Julian's profile, and immediately hit on match and report. Then I went to my phone's call log and blocked his number. I told myself I was losing my mind. The isolation, the creepy date in the underground garage, the outside. It was all compounding into a textbook case of paranoia. The house upstairs was old. Maybe a large animal, a raccoon or a stray dog, had found a way into the crawl space to escape the torrential rain. I kept the lights on. I didn't sleep a single wink. I sat up against the headboard until the dark windows turned a pale, foggy gray. On Monday morning, I felt a massive wave of relief when I stepped into the glass skyscraper downtown. The bright lights, the security guards at the front desk checking ID badges, the hundreds of employees rushing to the elevators. It felt like reality. The basement on Elm Street felt like a bad dream. I sat at my cubicle on the 22nd floor, drinking hot coffee, forcing myself to focus on financial spreadsheets. I felt safe. Arthur or Julian, whatever his name was, couldn't get to me here. This building was a fortress. Around 2 p.m., I needed to print some quarterly reports. The main corporate printer was located in a separate alcove down a long, quiet hallway past the server rooms. It was a low-traffic area of the floor. As I stood by the machine, watching the paper slide out into the tray, I felt a sudden drop in the air pressure around me. That same primal instinct from the garage flared up. I turned around. Standing at the end of the hallway, next to the emergency exit door, was a man. He was wearing a high-visibility yellow construction vest and carrying a metal clipboard, looking like a standard building maintenance worker. He had a blue surgical mask covering the lower half of his face and a low-brimmed baseball cap. But as he raised his head slightly, the fluorescent light caught his eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. It was him. He wasn't looking at the clipboard. He was staring directly at me down the long corridor. My heart leaped into my throat. Can I help you? I called out, my voice cracking with terror. The man didn't answer. He didn't blink. He slowly raised his left hand, the hand holding the clipboard, and pointed his index finger directly at me. Then he flipped the clipboard over. Taped to the back of the metal board was a piece of lined notebook paper. Written on it in thick black Sharpie marker were 3 characters, 412, the house number of my apartment on Elm Street. I let out a sharp gasp, dropping the printed reports onto the carpet. I turned to run toward the main cubicle bay to scream for help. It took me less than 10 seconds to reach the corner and look back with 2 male co-workers. The hallway was empty. The emergency exit door was heavy steel, equipped with an alarm that was supposed to trigger if opened. The alarm was silent. The lock was secure. He had vanished into the labyrinth of the 30-story building. When I complained to corporate security, they viewed the CCTV footage. They saw a man in a maintenance vest enter the service elevator using a clone security badge at 1:45 p.m. He had exited the building through the loading dock 5 minutes after I saw him. The security team told me it was likely a disgruntled former contractor or a case of mistaken identity. They told me to be careful, but there was nothing they could do. That was the escalation of presence. A true predator doesn't stay in the environment where you discovered him. He follows you to the places where you feel most secure, specifically to destroy your sense of safety. He wanted me to know that no tower of glass and steel could keep him out. By Tuesday, I was entirely unraveling. I couldn't focus at work. I couldn't eat. I dreaded the thought of driving my own car back to the isolated house on Elm Street. I felt like my vehicle had been compromised, like he knew the license plate, the route, everything. So on Wednesday night, after finishing another late shift at 8 p.m., I decided to leave my car in the corporate parking garage. I opened the Uber app on my phone and requested a ride all the way out to the suburbs. It was going to cost me $80, but I didn't care. I just wanted someone else to drive. I wanted a buffer between me and the dark. The app matched me with a driver named Marcus, driving a silver sedan. The rating was 4.9 stars. I walked down to the street level, pulled open the door of the silver car idling by the curb, and slid into the back seat. The car smelled heavily of cheap air freshener, a synthetic pine scent that made my eyes water. The driver was a stocky man wearing a dark hoodie, his face completely obscured by the darkness of the cabin, and a black baseball cap. "Heading to Elm Street?" he asked. His voice was deep, muffled by the collar of his jacket. "Yes," I said, leaning my head against the cold glass of the window. "Thank you for taking such a long drive this late." He didn't reply. He just shifted the car into drive and pulled out into the rainy city traffic. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. We got onto the interstate, the city lights fading into the dark, rolling hills of the outer suburbs. I tried to close my eyes to get some rest. But then I noticed the navigation screen on the dashboard. The Uber app on the mounted phone wasn't open. The screen was completely black. Instead, there was a secondary, smaller GPS device glued to the air vent. The map displayed a red line that was deviating heavily from the standard highway route. We were bypassing the exit for my town. We were heading deeper north into the unlit state park territory where the roads were dirt and the forest was dense. Excuse me, I said, sitting up straight in the back seat. "Marcus, I think you missed the turn for the interstate exchange. My house is west, not north." The driver didn't turn around. He didn't adjust his mirrors. He kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position. "Shortcut," he said simply. The voice was flat, emotionless. A cold dread flooded my chest. I pulled out my own phone to check the Uber app. My screen lit up, displaying an alert: "Driver cancel trip." The real Marcus had cancelled the ride 3 minutes before I ever walked out of the office building because of the heavy traffic. This man had been idling by the curb, waiting for me. He knew I had ordered a silver sedan. He had just waited for the perfect moment to pull up. It wasn't Marcus. It was Julian. It was Arthur. I looked at the door panel next to me. I reached down and pulled the chrome door handle. Nothing happened. The child safety locks had been engaged from the front console. The window switches were completely dead. I was trapped inside a moving metal coffin, traveling at 60 miles per hour into the wilderness. I didn't think. I acted on pure animal panic. I leaned forward into the space between the front seats, grabbed the heavy metal flashlight I had in my purse, and slammed it with all my strength into the side of the driver's skull. The man let out a sharp cry of pain, the steering wheel jerking violently to the right. The car veered off the road, slamming into a gravel ditch and coming to a sudden, bone-jarring halt. My head slammed into the back of the front seat, blinding me with pain, but the impact had unlocked the doors automatically. I threw the rear door open, tumbled out into the mud and the pouring rain, and ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the dark edge of the highway, my lungs burning, until I saw the bright green sign of a 24-hour truck stop half a mile away. I ran inside, screaming for the cashier to call the police. The state police responded in massive numbers. They found the silver car abandoned in the ditch. The vehicle had been stolen from an airport parking lot 3 days prior. The driver was gone, leaving nothing behind but a pair of wire-rimmed glasses covered in blood on the floor mat. 2 state troopers escorted me back to the Elm Street house at 4 a.m. to gather my essential belongings. I refused to set foot inside the basement alone, so I stood on the wet grass of the backyard, wrapped in a police blanket, watching their flashlights illuminate the small basement windows. It took the troopers less than 5 minutes to realize the full extent of the horror. One of the officers called me over to the stone steps. His face was entirely pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "Miss," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "you need to see this, but don't look too close." He pointed his heavy tactical light at the 4-foot wooden door of the crawl space, the door that was supposed to be secured by a modern brass padlock. The padlock was intact. The iron latch was untouched, but the entire wooden frame around the door had been meticulously altered. The old flathead screws holding the iron hinges to the wall had been replaced with clean, oiled magnetic pins. Anyone on the inside of the crawl space could simply pull the pins out, slide the entire heavy oak door out of its frame, backward into the dark, and step out into my hallway. The lock on the front was completely useless. It was a stage group. The troopers entered the crawl space with their weapons drawn. What they found underneath the floorboard of the main house wasn't an empty utility foundation. It was a fully functional, long-term living space. Arthur Vance, that was his real identity, a convicted felon who had escaped a minimum security facility in Vermont 6 months prior, had been living under that house long before the leasing agency ever put the basement apartment on the market. He had accessed the subfloor through an old, forgotten coal chute hidden beneath a pile of rotted firewood and thick ivy at the very back of the property. Inside the dark, damp dirt crawl space, directly beneath my bedroom floorboards, he had set up a campsite. There was a high-end cold-weather sleeping bag, a portable propane heater, dozens of plastic containers filled with water, and stacks of canned food. But the center of the campsite was a small, wooden crate. On top of the crate was a car battery connected to a series of wireless receivers. The police found 3 microscopic fiber optic pinhole cameras that had been drilled through the ceiling plaster. One was positioned inside the light fixture of my bathroom, looking directly down into the shower. One was inside the kitchen smoke detector, and the third one had been drilled directly through the drywall behind the fabric of my bed's headboard. He had been sitting in the pitch black, just inches from my skull, watching a live video feed of me sleeping on a tablet screen every single night. Next to the battery was the black leather ledger the detective had seen him write in at the garage. The police seized it as primary evidence, but the lead investigator allowed me to read a typed summary of the entries during my deposition. The ledger contained over 200 pages of highly detailed mathematical logs of my life. One entry read, "She chose the blue rug for the bathroom. It doesn't match the tile, but she likes it. She spent 20 minutes brushing her hair tonight. She seems sad." Another one said, "She is talking to someone named Julian on the app. He is an amateur. He doesn't know how to talk to a girl like her. I will have to intervene." And the final entry written in frantic, jagged cursive on Wednesday night, just hours before he intercepted me outside the office building. She hit me. The little bird has claws. She's running back to the nest. The storm tonight will knock out the power grid. The magnetic pins are out. Tonight, I sleep in the big bed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't trying to kidnap me on the highway. He was trying to force me to flee back to the house. He wanted me to run into the basement, lock the front door, and think I was safe, while he waited inside the wall to slide the hinges open. That brings me to right now. It's been exactly 3 weeks since the state police raided the house on Elm Street. Arthur Vance vanished into the woods behind the property before the troopers could establish a perimeter. They found his wet jacket near a drainage ditch a mile away, but the tracking dogs lost his scent at the edge of the river. He is still out there, somewhere. I didn't keep anything from that apartment. I left the furniture, the clothes, the books. I packed 3 suitcases of essentials, quit my job at the financial firm, and withdrew my savings. I've been living like a fugitive, driving down the interstate, checking into random anonymous motels along the highway, never staying in the same room for more than 48 hours. Tonight, I am staying at a corporate hotel downtown. It's a modern, secure place on the 14th floor. The elevators require an active key card just to select a floor. There is a security guard stationed in the lobby next to the cameras. The door to my room is a heavy, fire-rated steel slab with a digital RFID lock. I should feel safe here. I should be able to sleep. But about 20 minutes ago, around 3 a.m., I woke up. I woke up because I heard a sound. It was the faint, unmistakable sound of the heavy brass door handle on the inside of my room, slowly, methodically turning. I lay perfectly still in the dark, my eyes straining against the shadows. The hallway light peeks through the half-inch gap at the bottom of the door, casting a bright line across the carpet. In the middle of that line of light are the shadow of 2 shoes. Someone is standing right outside my door, completely silent, pressing their weight against the wood, and then my phone vibrated on the nightstand. With a hand that felt completely numb, I picked up the device. The screen illuminated the dark room with a harsh blue light. It was a text message from a new, unlisted 10-digit number. I opened it. There was no picture, just 5 words written in plain text. You forgot the chain bolt. My gaze slowly drifted from the phone screen to the top of the steel door frame. In my exhaustion tonight, in my rush to hide inside this room, I had engaged the electronic lock, but the heavy brass chain safety guard was still hanging loosely against the wall, and as I watched, the digital light on the door handle just clicked from red to green. The door is beginning to swing open.